Beneath the fading sun of 1875, Amelia Stokes kneels by the river, her heart heavy with the weight of an unborn child and a land under siege. A pregnant woman's quiet courage meets the shadow of greed as ruthless mercenaries close in, hungry for her family's legacy. Yet, in the stillness, a lone Apache warrior watches, his past scarred by loss, his resolve forged in justice. Will their defiance turn the tide against a merciless foe, or will the valley burn? The answers lie in a tale of sacrifice and unyielding spirit. Subscribe now, share where you're listening from, and uncover how far courage can carry them. Don't miss the heart-pounding conclusion. Every moment counts. The sun bled gold across Riverbend Valley, its dying light glinting off the river's restless surface in the autumn of 1875. Amelia Stokes knelt on the smooth river stones, her hand steady as she dipped a clay jug into the icy current. 8 months pregnant, her body carried the weight of life, but her eyes held the flinty resolve of a woman who'd learned to trust the land more than the men who claimed it. The air was crisp, scented with sagebrush and damp earth. But a strange hush had fallen. The crickets, usually a chorus at dusk, were silent. Even the cottonwoods stood still, their leaves refusing to whisper. Amelia's pulse quickened, a warning born of instinct. She tightened her grip on the jug, the cold clay grounding her as she rose. Her husband, Jack Stokes, was out tending the herd, leaving her alone on this stretch of river that carved their land from the wild. Jack, once a hunter whose name carried weight in the territories, had chosen this valley for peace. But peace was a fragile thing here, where greed wore a badge and a gun. Amelia scanned the tree line, her breath catching as a twig snapped under a heavy boot. 3 men stepped from the cottonwoods, their shadows long and jagged in the fading light. Caleb, broad as a barn door, his leather vest creaking with every step, led the pack. His grin was all teeth, like a coyote sizing up a kill. Behind him came Eli, lean and twitchy, his hand hovering over the pistol at his hip. Mitch brought up the rear, his face half hidden under a battered hat, eyes flickering with something like regret. They were Victor Hale's men, mercenaries bought by a landowner whose hunger for the valley's fertile acres knew no bounds. "Well now," Caleb drawled, his voice thick as molasses. "Look who's out here all alone, fetching water with a belly full of trouble." His gaze slid to Amelia's stomach, lingering in a way that made her skin crawl. She straightened, the jug heavy in her hands. "Jack ain't here," she said, her voice steady as stone. "And this land ain't for sale. You tell Hale that." Caleb's laugh was a low rumble, like thunder over the mesas. "Hale doesn't take kindly to no, ma'am. Where's your man hidin'? We got business with him." Mitch shifted, his boots scuffing the dirt. "Amelia," he said, quieter, almost pleading. "Just tell us where Jack is. Don't make this hard." Her eyes locked on Mitch, catching the shadow of conflict in his face. She'd heard Jack's stories, how he'd pulled Mitch from a burning outpost years ago, how they'd shared whiskey and promises under a desert sky. But that was before Mitch sold his soul to Hale, nursing a grudge Amelia could only guess at. "Go home, Mitch," she said, her words sharp, but not cruel. "You know Jack won't bend." Eli spat into the dust, his fingers twitching toward his gun. "Enough talk. Hale wants this land, and he'll have it, one way or another." Amelia stepped back, the river's hiss at her heels, its current cold and unforgiving. One slip on the moss-slick stones, and she'd be gone, her child with her. She gripped the jug tighter, ready to swing it like a club. "You touch me," she said, her voice low and fierce, "and it'll be the last thing you do." Caleb took a step closer, his boots grinding against the gravel. "Who's gonna stop us? That baby?" Your runaway husband?" His hand reached for her arm, but the air split with a sharp hiss. An arrow buried itself in the ground, inches from Caleb's foot, its fletching quivering like a warning from the earth itself. The three men froze, their bravado snuffed out like a candle in a storm. "Next one finds your heart," a voice called, calm as death from across the river. On a rocky outcrop stood Ironhawk, an Apache warrior, his black hair tied back with rawhide, his bow drawn taut. His eyes, sharp as obsidian, pinned the men where they stood. The sun caught the sinew of his bowstring, taut with promise, and for a moment, the valley held its breath. Caleb's face flushed red, his hand hovering over his pistol. "An Apache," he spat, the word dripping with venom. "You think one savage scares us?" Ironhawk didn't blink, his stance unyielding as the granite beneath him. "Leave her," he said, each word a blade. "Now." Mitch's hand twitched, caught between his gun and something heavier. Memory, maybe, or shame. Amelia saw it, her voice cutting through the tension. "Mitch, you don't have to do this. Walk away." The silence stretched, taut as Ironhawk's bowstring. Caleb's grin returned, but it was brittle, like dry bone. Eli's fingers danced closer to his holster. The river kept its own counsel, rushing past as if eager to escape what came next. Amelia stood her ground, the jug in her hands a shield, her heart pounding for the life she carried and the land she'd sworn to protect. Whatever happened now, she knew one thing. This riverside would mark the beginning of a fight that wouldn't end tonight. Whatever happened now, Amelia Stokes knew one thing. This riverside would mark the beginning of a fight that wouldn't end tonight. The river's relentless churn seemed to echo her resolve, its cold spray misting her hands as she clutched the clay jug. Caleb's grin hung brittle in the fading light. Eli's fingers twitched near his holster, and Mitch stood caught in a storm of doubt, his eyes flickering between Amelia and the Apache warrior across the water. Ironhawk's bowstring remained taut, a silent promise of violence held in check, his presence like a shadow cast by the mesas themselves. Ironhawk's voice cut through the tension again, low and unyielding as the granite outcrop beneath him. "Last chance. Walk away, or the river buries you." His words weren't loud, but they carried the weight of a man who'd seen too many graves to bluff. The sun dipped lower, painting his silhouette in fire, and for a moment, the valley seemed to hold its breath with him. Caleb's bravado cracked, his hand frozen above his pistol. "You think one arrow stops us?" he spat, but his voice wavered, betraying the fear that gnawed at his gut. Eli shifted, his boots grinding against the river stones, ready to draw. But Mitch raised a hand, slow and deliberate, halting him. "Hold it," Mitch said, his voice rough as gravel. He stepped forward, his gaze locked on Ironhawk. "Who are you to stick your nose in Hale's business? This ain't your fight." Ironhawk's eyes didn't waver, sharp as the obsidian points on his arrows. "It's mine now," he said. "A woman alone, carrying life, doesn't deserve your kind of trouble." His words landed like stones in still water, rippling through the silence. Amelia felt the weight of them, her grip on the jug tightening, her heart pounding for the child within her. Mitch's face twisted, a flicker of shame crossing his weathered features. He'd ridden with Jack Stokes once, shared campfires and stories under star-strewn skies. Jack had pulled him from death's jaws in a canyon ambush years back, but now Mitch wore Hale's coin like a chain. "You don't know what you're stepping into, Apache," he said, but the words lacked fire, as if he were trying to convince himself. Caleb snorted, breaking the moment. "Enough jawing. Hale wants this land, and we ain't leaving without answers." He took a step toward Amelia, his hand dropping to his gun, But Ironhawk was faster. The bowstring sang, and an arrow sliced through the air, grazing Caleb's ear and embedding in a cottonwood with a dull thunk. Blood trickled down Caleb's neck, his eyes wide with shock as he stumbled back. "Next one don't miss," Ironhawk said, already knocking another arrow. His movements were fluid, practiced, born of years surviving in the high deserts, where mercy was a luxury. Amelia caught a glimpse of his past in his stance, the boy who'd watched his family fall to soldiers' bullets, the man who'd sworn never to let the helpless suffer again. She didn't know his story, but she felt its truth in the way he stood between her and danger. Eli cursed, his hand jerking toward his pistol, but Ironhawk's bow snapped up, the arrow's point glinting in the last light. "Try it," he said, his voice a blade's edge. Eli froze, his bravado wilting under the Apache's gaze. The river hissed behind them, its current a restless witness to the standoff. Amelia seized the moment, stepping forward, the jug still in her hands. "Mitch," she said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "You knew Jack. You know he'd never give up this land. Hale's promises ain't worth the dirt you're standing on. Walk away." Mitch's jaw clenched, his eyes darting to the blood on Caleb's ear, then back to Amelia. "You don't get it," he muttered. "Hale don't stop. He'll burn this valley before he lets you keep it." His words were heavy, laced with the weight of a man who'd traded loyalty for coin and found it a bitter bargain. "Then let him try," Amelia said, her voice rising like a challenge. "This is our home. My child's home. You think I'll let Hale take it without a fight?" Caleb growled, wiping the blood from his ear. "You're a fool, woman. And this Apache ain't gonna save you when Hale brings his whole crew." He turned to Mitch, his eyes blazing. "You gonna let her talk like that? Or we finishing this?" Mitch hesitated, his revolver still holstered, his hand trembling. Ironhawk's bow didn't waver, but his eyes flicked to Amelia, a silent question. "Can you hold your ground?" She nodded, almost imperceptibly, her resolve a fire kindled by the life she carried and the land she loved. The standoff stretched taut, the river's roar filling the silence. Then, from the cottonwoods, a new sound, a rustle, heavy and deliberate. All heads turned as Victor Hale himself stepped into the open, his tailored coat stark against the wild valley. His eyes gleamed with cold intent, a predator sizing up his prey. "Enough," he said, his voice smooth as oil but sharp as a blade. "Take her. She'll bring Stokes to me." Ironhawk's bow shifted, the arrow now aimed at Hale's chest. The air thickened, the promise of blood hanging heavy. Amelia's heart thundered, but she stood tall, the jug her only weapon, her will unyielding. Whatever came next, she knew the valley would never be the same. Whatever came next, Amelia Stokes knew the valley would never be the same. Victor Hale's command hung in the air like gun smoke, his tailored coat a stark insult to the wild heart of Riverbend. Ironhawk's arrow, aimed at Hale's chest, gleamed with lethal promise, while Amelia stood firm, the clay jug her only shield. The river roared behind her, its current a restless witness to the standoff, as the sun sank below the horizon, casting the valley in a twilight that felt like the edge of a blade. Hale's eyes narrowed, his voice cold as iron. "You're a fool, Apache, and you, woman, you'll regret defying me." He took a step back, his men tensing, but Ironhawk's bow didn't waver. The silence stretched taut, broken only by the river's churn and the faint creak of Caleb's leather vest as he clutched his bleeding ear. Mitch, still frozen, his revolver undrawn, stared at Amelia with a gaze heavy with unspoken ghosts. Then, as if the valley itself exhaled, a memory stirred in Ironhawk's mind, sharp and unbidden. Years ago, under a sky bruised with storm clouds, He'd stood in a different valley, a boy of 12, watching soldiers' bayonets glint as they tore through his family's camp. His mother's scream had cut off abruptly, his father's bow snapping under a soldier's boot. The smoke of burning wickiups had choked the air, and Ironhawk, hidden in the sagebrush, had vowed to never again let the innocent fall. That vow had brought him here, to this riverbank, where Amelia's defiance echoed his own. He spoke, his voice low but carrying like a desert wind. "You speak of regret, Hale, but you don't know its weight. Harm her, and you'll learn." His words weren't a threat, but a truth, carved from the losses that had shaped him. Amelia caught the steel in his tone, sensing a story she didn't yet know, but felt in her bones. Hale smirked, undeterred, his hand resting on the ivory grip of his pistol. "You think you scare me? This valley's mine, and I'll have it. Woman, land, and all." He nodded to Eli, who edged forward, his eyes darting between Ironhawk and the darkening tree line. But Mitch's voice, rough and sudden, stopped him. "Wait," Mitch said, stepping into the space between Hale and Amelia. His hand hovered over his holster, but his eyes were on her, haunted by a past that refused to stay buried. "This ain't right, Hale. She's got a kid coming. Jack's land ain't worth this." Hale's gaze turned venomous. "You forget who pays you, Mitch. You owe me loyalty, not Stokes." Mitch's jaw tightened, and for a moment, the valley seemed to pause, waiting for his choice. Amelia saw it, the flicker of the man he'd been when he rode with Jack. She'd heard the stories from her husband, nights by a campfire in the Chiricahua foothills, where Jack and Mitch had fought off bandits, their laughter mingling with the crackle of burning mesquite. Jack had dragged Mitch, bleeding and half dead, from a canyon skirmish, binding his wounds under a merciless sun. That debt had bound them until Hale's coin, and Mitch's bitterness had torn it apart. "You don't owe him nothin'," Amelia said, her voice steady as the river stones beneath her. "Jack saved you once. Don't let Hale make you a man you ain't." Mitch's hand trembled, the revolver still holstered. "You don't understand," he muttered. "Jack walked away, left me to rot in Hale's shadow. He doesn't get to keep this land while I got nothin'." His words were raw, a wound laid bare, but there was a crack in his resolve, a flicker of the friend Jack had known. Ironhawk shifted, his bow still trained on Hale. He saw the conflict in Mitch, the same struggle he'd seen in men who'd lost too much to trust their own hearts. Years back, Jack Stokes had come to his people's aid, bringing horses and blankets through a brutal winter, when soldiers had left the Apache to starve. That act had earned Ironhawk's respect, a bond forged not in blood, but in shared survival. Now, standing here, he saw the same fight in Amelia, a refusal to bend, a fire that matched his own. Caleb, nursing his wounded ear, spat into the dust. "You gone soft, Mitch? Let's finish this and be done." He drew his pistol, the metal glinting in the twilight, but Ironhawk's arrow was faster, slicing through the air to nick Caleb's wrist. The gun clattered to the stones, and Caleb cursed, clutching his hand. "Enough!" Hale snapped, his patience fraying. He drew his own pistol, aiming at Amelia, his eyes cold with intent. "You want a war, Apache? You'll get one. Take her now." Ironhawk moved like a shadow, leaping across the river's shallows in 3 strides, landing between Hale and Amelia. His knife flashed in his hand, the bow slung across his back. "You'll go through me first," he said, his voice a low growl, the kind that carried the weight of a man who'd fought too many battles to fear another. Amelia's heart pounded, the jug heavy in her hands, but she stood her ground, her eyes locked on Hale. The valley's twilight deepened, the air thick with the scent of sage and the promise of blood. Mitch's gaze darted between her and Ironhawk, his hand still hovering, torn between loyalty and redemption. The river roared on, indifferent to the choices that would shape the valley's fate. Whatever path Mitch chose, Amelia knew the fight was far from over, and the ghosts of the past would not stay silent. Whatever path Mitch chose, Amelia Stokes knew the ghosts of the past would not stay silent. The twilight deepened over Riverbend Valley, the air thick with sage and the metallic tang of impending violence. Victor Hale's pistol gleamed in the fading light, aimed at Amelia, while Ironhawk stood between them, his knife a glinting promise of resistance. The river's roar filled the silence, its current a restless mirror to the tension that coiled like a rattlesnake ready to strike. Mitch's hand hovered over his revolver, his eyes darting between Hale's cold command and Amelia's unyielding defiance, the weight of his betrayal heavy as a desert storm. Hale's voice sliced through the stillness, sharp as a spur. "Take her, or I'll do it myself." His eyes burned with a greed that had already swallowed half the valley, his tailored coat flapping like a vulture's wings in the evening breeze. Caleb, clutching his wounded wrist, snarled, his blood staining the riverstones. Eli, still shaken from Ironhawk's arrow, edged closer, his fingers itching for his gun. Amelia gripped the clay jug tighter, her heart pounding for the child she carried, her resolve a fire that no threat could douse. Ironhawk moved first, his knife flashing as he lunged at Hale. The landowner dodged, his pistol firing a wild shot that cracked against a cottonwood, splintering bark into the air. Amelia ducked behind a boulder, the jug still in her hands, her breath sharp and quick. Ironhawk rolled into the shadows, his movements silent as a mountain cat, reappearing to slash at Eli's gun hand, sending the pistol spinning into the dirt. Caleb roared, charging with a knife of his own, but Ironhawk sidestepped, tripping him into the river's shallows, where he floundered, cursing. Amelia seized the moment, her voice rising over the chaos. "Mitch, you see what Hale is? He'll burn us all to get what he wants. You don't have to follow him." Her words were a plea, not for mercy, but for the man Mitch had been. The one who'd shared a campfire with Jack, who'd once known loyalty over coin. Mitch's face twisted, his revolver half raised, aimed at no one. "You don't get it, Amelia," he said, his voice raw as torn leather. "Hale owns this valley. Ain't no fight in him." But his eyes betrayed him, flickering with the shame of a man who'd traded his soul and found the bargain wanting. Hale laughed, a sound like dry bones rattling. "Listen to your friend, Mitch. Finish this, or you're as useless as Stokes." He stepped forward, his pistol trained on Amelia's boulder, his intent clear. He'd take her to force Jack's hand, to break the valley's last holdout. Ironhawk surged from the shadows, tackling Hale to the ground. The two grappled, dust rising in clouds, Hale's gun firing again, the bullet kicking up gravel near Amelia's feet. She swung the jug, catching Caleb across the temple as he staggered from the river, sending him sprawling unconscious. Eli, scrambling for his fallen pistol, froze as Ironhawk's knife pressed against Hale's throat, the blade a whisper from blood. "Drop it," Ironhawk growled, his voice low as thunder over the mesas. Hale's pistol clattered to the stones, his smirk gone, replaced by a snarl of frustration. "This ain't over," he spat, his eyes locked on Amelia. "I'll have this land, and your man'll beg me to take it." Amelia stepped from behind the boulder, her voice steady despite the ache in her arms. "You'll get nothing, Hale. This valley's ours, and we'll fight for it." She glanced at Mitch, her gaze a challenge. "You can still choose, right, Mitch? Walk away." Mitch's hand trembled, the revolver slipping back into its holster. He looked at Hale, then at Amelia, his face a map of regret. "I can't," he whispered. But he turned, stepping back toward the cottonwoods, his shadow fading into the dusk. It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was a crack in Hale's grip. Hale shoved Ironhawk off, scrambling to his feet. "You'll pay for this," he said, his voice a venomous promise. He retreated into the trees, dragging Caleb's limp form, Eli stumbling after him. Ironhawk let them go, his knife still in hand, his eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of a second attack. Amelia lowered the jug, her breath ragged but her spirit unbroken. "Thank you," she said to Ironhawk, her voice soft but firm. "You didn't have to stand with me." He sheathed his knife, his gaze distant, fixed on the river's flow. "I fight for what's right," he said. "Your land, your child, they matter." His words carried the weight of a man who'd lost everything but held fast to his vow. The valley settled into an uneasy quiet, the river's song the only sound. Amelia felt the child kick, a reminder of why she fought. If you're gripped by this tale of courage and defiance, subscribe to hear how it unfolds, and let us know where you're listening from. The fight was far from over, and Hale's retreat was only a pause. As the stars emerged, sharp against the night, Amelia knew the valley's fate hung on the choices yet to come. As the stars emerged, sharp against the night, Amelia Stokes knew the valley's fate hung on the choices yet to come. The river's song faded into the dark, its restless churn a faint echo as Victor Hale and his men vanished into the cottonwoods, their retreat a temporary reprieve. Amelia stood by the riverbank, the clay jug heavy in her aching arms, her breath steadying as Ironhawk scanned the tree line, his knife still gleaming with the promise of blood. The air carried the scent of dust and sage, thick with the weight of what had passed, and what was still to come. The night deepened, stars cutting through the sky like shards of ice. Amelia set the jug down, her hands trembling not from fear, but from the fire of defiance that burned in her chest. Ironhawk sheathed his knife, his eyes meeting hers in the moonlight. "They'll come back," he said, his voice low as the wind over the mesas. "Hale, don't quit." "I know," Amelia replied, her gaze fixed on the shadowed path where Hale had fled. "But neither do we." The child within her stirred, a quiet reminder of the stakes, her home, her family, the land that held their future. She turned toward the trail leading to their ranch, Ironhawk falling into step beside her, his presence a silent anchor in the gathering dark. They reached the ranch as the moon climbed high, its pale light spilling over the adobe walls and the corral where the horses snorted softly. Amelia lit a lantern, its glow casting long shadows across the yard. She glanced at Ironhawk, who stood at the gate, his silhouette sharp against the night. "You don't owe us this fight," she said. "Why stay?" Ironhawk's gaze drifted to the horizon, where the valley stretched wild and unyielding. "I've seen too many lose what's theirs to men like Hale. Your child deserves a home. That's reason enough." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of a man who'd carved his purpose from loss. Before Amelia could respond, a low rumble broke the silence, hoofbeats, distant but growing louder, like thunder rolling down the valley. Ironhawk's hand went to his bow, his body tensing like a coiled spring. Amelia grabbed the Winchester leaning against the porch, her fingers curling around the worn stock. "They're back already," she said, her voice steady despite the knot in her gut. The hoofbeats grew sharper, and shadows moved in the moonlight. A dozen riders, not just Hale's trio, but a larger crew, their silhouettes bristling with rifles and torches. Hale rode at the front, his coat flapping like a storm cloud, his face lit by the flickering flame in his hand. Behind him, new faces, hard-eyed strangers, mercenaries drawn by coin, their spurs glinting like fangs. Caleb and Eli flanked him, their wounds bandaged, but their anger raw. "Hale," Amelia called, stepping into the yard, the Winchester raised. "You got no claim here. Turn back." Hale reined in his horse, his smile cold as a winter creek. "This ends tonight, Stokes. Your land's mine, and I'll burn it to ash if I have to." He raised his torch, the flame casting grotesque shadows across his men. Ironhawk stepped forward, an arrow nocked, his bowstring taut. "You'll burn nothing," he said, his voice a blade. He loosed the arrow, and it struck Hale's torch, sending it spinning into the dirt, where it sputtered and died. The riders flinched, their horses snorting, but Hale's laugh cut through the chaos, sharp and unhinged. "Kill them!" he roared, and the riders charged, their rifles cracking as bullets tore through the night. Amelia fired, the Winchester's recoil biting her shoulder, and a mercenary's hat spun into the dust. Ironhawk moved like a shadow, his arrows finding targets with deadly precision. One rider fell, clutching his chest. Another reeled as an arrow grazed his arm. The ranch yard erupted into chaos, dust rising thick as smoke, horses rearing as bullets sparked against the corral fence. Amelia ducked behind the porch rail, reloading with steady hands, each shell a promise to protect her home. She fired again, forcing a rider to veer off, his horse screaming. Ironhawk darted between cover, his knife now in hand, slashing at a mercenary who dismounted to flank the house. The man collapsed, his rifle clattering uselessly. Hale, still mounted, drew a second pistol, his eyes locked on Amelia. "You can't win," he shouted, firing a shot that splintered the porch post inches from her head. She didn't flinch, aiming and firing back, the bullet grazing his saddle, forcing him to swerve. Ironhawk seized the moment, his arrow piercing the hand of another rider, who dropped his torch into the dirt. The fight raged, the air thick with gunpowder and the tang of blood. Amelia's shoulder ached, but she kept firing, her shots measured, each one a defiance of Hale's greed. Ironhawk moved like a specter, his arrows and knife cutting through the chaos, forcing the riders to break formation. The mercenaries, unprepared for such resistance, began to falter, their shouts turning to curses as they stumbled over the uneven ground. As the moon dipped behind a cloud, the tide shifted. A mercenary turned his horse, fleeing into the night, and others followed, their torches flickering out. Hale, bloodied but unbowed, glared at Amelia, his voice a snarl. "This ain't the end, Stokes." He wheeled his horse and rode off, his men trailing in a cloud of dust. Amelia lowered the Winchester, her arms trembling, but her spirit unbroken. Ironhawk emerged from the shadows, his bow still in hand, his eyes scanning the horizon. The ranch stood scarred, but standing, the night quiet once more. But as the stars burned cold above, Amelia knew Hale's defeat was only a pause in a war that would test them all. But as the stars burned cold above, Amelia Stokes knew Hale's defeat was only a pause in a war that would test them all. The ranch stood scarred, its fences splintered, the earth churned with hoofprints and spent shells. The night air hung heavy with gunpowder and the faint tang of blood, the silence fragile as cracked glass. Amelia lowered the Winchester, her arms aching, her breath steadying as she felt the child kick within her, a quiet defiance matching her own. Ironhawk stood at the edge of the yard, his bow still in hand, his eyes scanning the dark horizon where Hale's men had vanished. The valley held its breath, waiting for the next move. A new sound broke the stillness. Hoofbeats, slow and deliberate, coming from the western trail. Amelia tensed, her fingers tightening on the rifle, but Ironhawk's stance eased, his head tilting as if he recognized the rhythm. From the shadows emerged Jack Stokes, his broad frame slumped in the saddle, his hat low over eyes that had seen too much of the world's cruelty. His horse snorted, its coat lathered from a hard ride, and Jack's gaze swept the yard, taking in the chaos, the fallen torches, the bullet-scarred corral, the blood-streaked stones. "Amelia," he said, his voice rough as gravel, swinging down from the saddle. He crossed the yard in long strides, his duster flapping like a raven's wings, and pulled her into a brief, fierce embrace. His hands, calloused from years of hunting and fighting, lingered on her shoulders, checking for wounds. "You're all right," he said, more to himself than to her, his eyes searching her face. She nodded, the Winchester still in her grip. Hale came with 12 men. Ironhawk held them off with me. She gestured to the Apache, who stood a few paces away, his silhouette sharp against the moonlit sky. Jack turned to Ironhawk, his expression unreadable but heavy with gratitude. "You stood for my family," he said, stepping forward to clasp the warrior's forearm, a gesture as binding as any oath in the territories. "I owe you, friend." Ironhawk's grip was firm, his eyes steady. "No debt," he said. "Your wife fought like a mountain lion. This land's worth defending." His words carried the weight of their shared history. Jack's aid to Ironhawk's people years ago, when he'd brought horses through a snow-choked pass to save a starving Apache camp. That act had forged a bond, one that held fast now in the face of Hale's greed. Jack's jaw tightened as Amelia recounted the night's battle. Hale's torchlit charge, the mercenaries' gunfire, Mitch's retreat into the dark. "Mitch was here?" he asked, his voice low, a shadow crossing his face. "He's riding with Hale now?" "He's torn," Amelia said, her voice steady but laced with pity. "He wouldn't pull the trigger, but he ain't free of Hale yet." Jack spat into the dust, his hand resting on the revolver at his hip. "Mitch and I were brothers once. Saved each other's hides more times than I can count. But if he's chosen Hale, he's chosen a fight he won't win." His words were hard, but beneath them lay a wound that hadn't healed, a betrayal that cut deeper than any bullet. Ironhawk's gaze flicked to the horizon, where the first hints of dawn stained the sky. "Hale'll bring more next time," he said. "Men like him don't stop till the ground's red or they're broken." Jack nodded, his eyes scanning the ranch, its adobe walls still standing, the corral where the horses stirred, the garden where Amelia grew maize for their future. "Then we make ready," he said. "This land's ours, and no man's taken it." Amelia set the Winchester against the porch rail, her hand steady despite the ache in her shoulders. "We need more than us," she said, her voice firm. "Hale's got coin to buy men. We need allies." Ironhawk's expression didn't change, but his eyes held a glint of resolve. "There's a camp in the mountains, 2 days' ride. My people are there. Some'll come if I ask." Jack's brow furrowed. "Will they fight for our land?" "They'll fight for what's right," Ironhawk replied. "But they need to see why it matters." Amelia met his gaze, her voice unwavering. "Bring them here. I'll show them." The child kicked again, a fierce reminder of the life she was fighting for, and she felt a surge of certainty. This ranch wasn't just dirt. It was home, a legacy for the child to come. Jack's hand found hers, his grip warm and grounding. "We'll hold this place," he said, his voice a promise carved in stone. "Together." Ironhawk nodded, slinging his bow over his shoulder. "I'd leave at first light. You'll need to watch the trails till I'm back." He turned toward the hills, his steps silent, already blending with the shadows. As dawn's first rays touched the valley, Amelia and Jack stood on the porch, the air sharp with the scent of mesquite and morning dew. The ranch bore the scars of the night's fight, but it stood unbroken, a testament to their defiance. Hale's men were gone for now, but the hoofbeats of their retreat still echoed in Amelia's mind, a warning that the war was far from over. She felt Jack's hand tighten around hers, and she knew that whatever came next, they'd face it as one, with Ironhawk's promise of aid, a faint hope in the gathering light. She felt Jack's hand tighten around hers, and Amelia Stokes knew that whatever came next, they'd face it as one, with Ironhawk's promise of aid, a faint hope in the gathering light. The dawn broke sharp over Riverbend Valley, its first rays glinting off the adobe walls of their ranch, still standing despite the scars of Hale's attack. The air was crisp, with mesquite and dew, but the quiet felt heavy, like the hush before a storm. Amelia stood on the porch, the Winchester within reach, her eyes scanning the trails for any sign of dust. Ironhawk had vanished into the hills, his promise to return with allies, the only shield against the dread coiling in her gut. Jack moved through the yard, checking the corral's splintered posts and the barbed wire they'd strung as a last defense. His face was hard, etched with the weight of a man who'd traded a warrior's life for peace, only to find war at his door. "Hale'll come harder next time," he said, his voice low as he tested a loose fence post. "We need to be ready." Amelia nodded, her hand resting on her belly, feeling the child's steady kick. "Ironhawk'll bring help," she said, her voice firm despite the uncertainty gnawing at her. "But till he's back, it's just us." The day passed in a tense rhythm of preparation. Jack hauled coils of wire from the shed, reinforcing the yard's defenses, while Amelia cleaned the Winchester, her hand steady as she oiled the barrel. The ranch, though battered, stood defiant, its adobe walls a testament to their resolve. But as the sun climbed, the silence grew oppressive, broken only by the distant cry of a hawk circling the mesas. Every creak of the corral gate, every rustle in the sagebrush, set Amelia's nerves on edge. She kept the rifle close, her eyes flicking to the western trail where Ironhawk had gone. Night fell, the stars sharp as knife points against the black sky. Amelia sat by the hearth, the lantern low, its glow casting flickering shadows on the walls. Jack stood at the window, his revolver holstered, but his hand never far from it. "If Hale comes before Ironhawk's back," he said, his voice steady but grim, "we hold the line here." She met his gaze, her own resolve mirroring his. "We've held it before," she said. "We'll do it again." The child kicked, a fierce reminder of why they fought, not just for the land, but for the life it would cradle. A low whistle cut through the night, sharp and deliberate, from the ridge above the ranch. Jack tensed, his hand on his gun, but Amelia recognized the sound. Ironhawk's signal. She stepped onto the porch, the cool air biting her skin, and saw shadows moving down the trail. Ironhawk led them, his bow slung across his back, his steps silent as a mountain lion's. Behind him came 6 figures, their silhouettes stark against the moonlit ridge. They were Apache, their faces unreadable, their gear simple but lethal. Bows, knives, and a few rifles glinting in the starlight. Ironhawk reached the gate, his eyes meeting Amelia's. "These are my people," he said, gesturing to the group. "Nantan, Ishki, and the others. They've come to see." Amelia stepped forward, the Winchester at her side, her voice steady despite the weight of their scrutiny. "This is our home," she said, her words carrying across the yard. "Hale wants to take it, burn it, to break us. But this land ain't just ours. It's where my child will grow, where we'll stand against men who think they can take what don't belong to them. If he wins here, he'll come for others, for your lands too." Nantan, a broad-shouldered man with eyes like chipped flint, studied her for a long moment. Ishki, a woman with a short bow and a quiver bristling with arrows, tilted her head, her gaze sharp but not unkind. The others stood silent, their faces carved from the same resolve that had kept their people free in the face of soldiers and settlers. Finally, Nantan nodded. "We'll fight," he said simply, "for what's right." Relief flooded Amelia, though she kept her face steady. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but firm. She turned to the house, fetched bread and a jug of water, and offered them to the newcomers. They accepted, their voices low as they spoke among themselves, planning in a language Amelia didn't know, but understood in its rhythm. Steady, deliberate, like the valley itself. Ironhawk stayed by the gate, his eyes on the horizon. "They'll watch the ridge tonight," he said. "Hale won't catch us blind." Jack joined them, his hand resting on the porch rail. "How many'll come with Hale?" he asked, his voice low, already bracing for the answer. "More than before," Ironhawk replied. "He's got coin for men, and anger to drive 'em. But we've got the ground." He gestured to the ridge, the river, the narrow trails that could be turned against an enemy. "We make it cost him." Amelia felt the child kick again, a pulse of life that steadied her. The night stretched on, the Apache camp a quiet presence on the ridge, their fire small but vigilant. The ranch stood ready, its defenses sharper now, bolstered by allies bound not by blood, but by a shared defiance. As the moon traced its arc across the sky, Amelia knew the fight was coming, and it would be the hardest yet. The valley's silence was no longer a threat, but a promise, of a stand that would echo beyond the dawn. The valley's silence was no longer a threat, but a promise, of a stand that would echo beyond the dawn. The moon traced its final arc across the sky, casting pale light over Riverbend Valley, where the ranch stood ready, its barbed wire and shallow pits a silent defiance against Victor Hale's greed. Amelia Stokes stood in the loft of the barn, the Winchester's stock firm against her shoulder, her breath steady despite the ache of carrying her unborn child. On the ridge above, Ironhawk and his Apache allies, Nantan, Ishki, and the others, crouched among the rocks, their bows and rifles glinting faintly. Jack patrolled the yard below, his revolver drawn, his eyes scanning the dark trails for the dust of Hale's return. A low rumble stirred the air, heavy and relentless, like the growl of a distant storm. Hoofbeats, too many to count, rolled down the valley, shaking the earth beneath Amelia's feet. Ironhawk's whistle cut through the night, sharp and urgent, signaling the approach. She adjusted her grip on the rifle, her heart pounding but her focus clear as the star-lit sky. The child within her stirred, as if sensing the battle to come, and she whispered, "Hold on, little one. We're not done yet." The riders emerged from the darkness, a wedge of shadows bristling with steel. Victor Hale rode at the front, his black coat flapping like a vulture's wings, his face carved with a fury that burned hotter than his torches. Beside him was Mitch, his hat low, his eyes hollow with conflict, his revolver unholstered but limp in his hand. Behind them came over 20 men. Hale's hired guns, their spurs glinting, their rifles raised, drawn by coin and the promise of blood. The valley seemed to shrink under their weight, the air thick with dust and the tang of gunpowder. "Stokes!" Hale's voice boomed, sharp as a whip crack. "Surrender your land, or we burn it to the ground!" He raised a torch, its flame flaring against the night, casting grotesque shadows across his men. Amelia leaned out from the loft, the Winchester's sights trained on Hale. "You'll take nothing," she called, her voice steady as the river stones. "This is our home, and you'll pay for every step you take." Ironhawk loosed an arrow from the ridge, the shaft hissing through the air to strike Hale's torch, sending it tumbling into the dirt. The flame died, but Hale's laugh was a jagged blade. "Kill them all!" he roared, and the riders charged, their rifles cracking as bullets tore through the night. Amelia fired, the recoil biting her shoulder, and a mercenary's rifle spun from his hands, his horse veering into the barbed wire. The animal screamed, throwing its rider into a pit concealed by brush. From the ridge, the Apaches struck with lethal precision. Ishki's short bow sang, an arrow dropping a rider clean from his saddle. Nantan's rifle boomed, its report echoing off the canyon walls, forcing Hale's men to scatter. Ironhawk moved like a specter, his arrows finding gaps in the chaos, each shot a silent vow to protect the land. Jack held the yard, his revolver spitting fire, each bullet measured to keep the mercenaries at bay. Hale pressed forward, a second torch in hand, his eyes locked on the barn. Amelia aimed, her shot grazing his arm, the torch falling to sputter in the dust. He cursed, drawing his pistol, but Ironhawk was already there, his knife flashing as he tackled a mercenary flanking the house. The man collapsed, his weapon useless. Mitch, caught in the fray, fired wildly, his shots missing as his hands shook, torn between Hale's orders and the ghost of his past with Jack. The battle raged, dust rising thick as fog, the air heavy with the stench of powder and blood. Amelia reloaded, her fingers steady despite the ache in her arms, each shell a promise to her child. The mercenaries stumbled into traps, their horses caught in wire, their shouts turning to cries as the Apaches struck from the shadows. Hale's line faltered, his men breaking under the relentless crossfire. Mitch, his face a mask of anguish, rode toward the barn, his pistol raised, but his aim uncertain. "Jack!" he shouted, his voice breaking. "This ain't what I wanted!" Jack stepped from cover, his revolver trained on his old friend. "Then stop it, Mitch," he said, his voice hard, but laced with pain. Mitch's hand trembled, and with a cry, he turned his gun on himself, collapsing into the dirt, his blood soaking the valley's earth. Hale saw the tide turn, his men retreating in a cloud of dust. He wheeled his horse, his face twisted with rage. "You've won nothing," he spat, vanishing into the night. Silence fell, broken only by the groans of the wounded and the river's distant murmur. Amelia lowered the Winchester, her arms trembling, her spirit unbroken. Ironhawk emerged from the ridge, his bow still in hand, his eyes scanning the horizon. The Apaches tended their own, offering water even to Hale's fallen men. Jack knelt by Mitch's body, his face heavy with grief. "He chose wrong," he said softly, "but he was my brother once." Amelia touched his shoulder, feeling the child kick, a reminder of the life they'd fought for. The dawn broke, its gold spilling over the scarred ranch, the valley standing firm. Amelia looked out over the land, her home, and knew Hale would return. But as the sun rose, she felt the weight of their victory, a fragile peace, hard won, that would echo through the valley's heart. The sun rose over Riverbend Valley, its light a testament to Amelia, Jack, and Ironhawk's unyielding stand against greed. Their fight for home and justice echoes beyond the dawn, a reminder that courage carves peace from chaos. I'm grateful for your joining this journey through a land where every choice carries weight. What did their defiance stir in you? Share your thoughts. Where are you listening from, and what resonated most? Your reflections keep this story alive. Until we meet again in the next tale, hold fast to the spirit of those who stand for what's right, no matter the cost. Farewell for now, from the heart of the valley.